They say the most radiant flame attracts both warmth and destruction, and Carl Jung saw this truth lived out in the lives of those with rare empathic depth. What should have been their blessing, this almost supernatural ability to feel into another's soul, was often the very reason their hearts broke again and again. Jung noticed something chilling in his practice. Those who lived most authentically in their emotions became mirrors, and when people looked into them, they did not always see beauty. They saw their own buried shadows staring back, and shadows do not thank the light for revealing them. They recoil, they resist, they strike. Jung wrote of a paradox so cruel, it seemed almost designed by fate itself. The empath becomes both sanctuary and battlefield, healer and scapegoat. People are drawn to them with a hunger they cannot explain. They open up, they confess, they finally breathe in the rare air of being understood. And then, almost inevitably, the very qualities that once felt like salvation begin to feel unbearable. Resentment creeps in, disguised as criticism, cloaked as concern, dripping with sarcasm or disdain. What was once a safe harbor becomes a threat, not because the empath changed, but because the other person could no longer tolerate the reflection of their own abandoned emotional truth. This was not ordinary relationship drama. Jung knew he was watching something archetypal, something primal. The sensitive soul carries within them what many people lost in childhood: the courage to feel, to ache, to remain open despite a world that teaches numbness as survival. Their presence alone becomes a silent accusation against those who chose suppression. And because the human psyche resists guilt, it turns outward. You are too much. You are too sensitive. You should toughen up. The empath's sin was not weakness. It was daring to keep alive what others had killed within themselves. Jung saw this pattern unfold with devastating consistency. Patients who lived with luminous authenticity, who had never fully abandoned their inner feeling function, were not simply misunderstood, they were punished. Their empathy became a stage upon which unconscious resentment performed its cruelest acts. And the tragedy was always the same. The empath began to believe the accusations. They started to see their own light as a problem, their openness as naivety, their emotional depth as a flaw. The punishment worked. The mirror began to crack. The psychological cruelty of this dynamic is almost mathematical in its symmetry. The empath's greatest strength, the refusal to betray feeling, exposes the deepest wound in others, the betrayal of their own emotions. So the cycle begins: attraction, confession, healing, resentment, rejection. Over and over, the pattern repeats, leaving the sensitive soul questioning whether their very nature is doomed to bring sorrow. Jung described this not as coincidence, but as shadow projection in its purest form, people unconsciously transferring the disowned parts of themselves onto the one person alive enough to carry them. This explains why empaths often feel like emotional scapegoats. They absorb blame for storms that existed long before they arrived. They are punished for evoking grief that others refuse to face. And still, they continue offering sanctuary, because their nature is not to close, but to open, not to wound, but to heal. Yet even the strongest flame grows weary when it is smothered again and again. Jung went further, warning of 3 catastrophic dangers awaiting the empath who cannot protect their gift. First, authenticity erosion, the slow death of hiding one's feelings to avoid triggering others. Second, self-betrayal, believing the lies projected onto them until they too attack their own sensitivity. Third, collective stagnation, the loss of humanity's emotional pioneers when the world convinces them their very existence is too much. Each danger is not just personal, it is civilizational. When empaths dim, the whole world dims. But Jung was not a prophet of despair. He believed survival, even transformation, was possible. He taught empaths to see hostility not as personal, but as diagnostic, a revelation of another's wounds, not of their own failure. The criticism, "You're too sensitive," does not describe the empath's flaw. It confesses the critic's numbness. The attack, "You trust too much," reveals not the empath's weakness, but the attacker's betrayal of trust long ago. Jung reframed projection into information, a map of the other's shadow disguised as judgment. Yet recognition alone was not enough. Jung spoke of boundaries, those invisible walls empaths so often struggle to build. True compassion, he argued, is not drowning with the drowning, but extending a hand while keeping one's own footing. To remain open without being consumed, to stay soft without becoming broken. That was the art of survival. He called it discernment, the sacred ability to tell the difference between genuine connection and unconscious attack. Still, Jung knew even the strongest empath cannot endure alone. The sanctuary they offer must also be given to them. He urged them to find their tribe, those rare souls who celebrate authenticity rather than resent it, who do not mistake depth for danger or light for threat. With them, the empath is not too much, but finally enough. In their presence, the gift can expand rather than shrink. Without such community, the sensitive one becomes either martyr or ghost, either consumed in endless service or hidden in bitter isolation. Jung illustrated his insight with stories that still haunt the imagination. Francis of Assisi, who embraced radical compassion even when it threatened the cold structures of religion, survived by never dimming his light. Vincent van Gogh, whose art burned with unbearable sensitivity, did not survive. His tragedy, not that he felt too much, but that he believed others' scorn meant he was wrong to feel at all. The difference between saint and casualty was not sensitivity itself, but whether the light was protected or left naked to every storm. And perhaps Jung's most daring confession was that he too lived this paradox. His insights into shadow and authenticity were not born from theory alone, but from his own bruises. He knew what it meant to be resented for seeing too deeply, to walk into rooms where truth felt like intrusion. His choice was stark: dim his perception to belong, or keep it and risk exile. He chose the latter, and in that choice, he modeled what he asked of every sensitive soul: that authenticity is not arrogance, it is necessity. At the highest level of integration, Jung envisioned what I would call luminous compassion, the ability to shine fully without rage at those who cannot yet stand the light. To know that their hostility is not hatred of you, but grief for themselves. To carry your gift without superiority or shame, knowing it is neither flaw nor weapon, but medicine. Medicine only for those ready to receive it, but medicine nonetheless. Empaths, then, are not simply fragile anomalies in a cruel world. They are bridges between numbness and feeling, between the abandoned past and the possible future. They remind humanity what it has forgotten, that to feel is not weakness, but life itself. Jung's most disturbing discovery was not that people resent the empath, but why. They resent in them the ghost of their own abandoned emotional truth. And his most hopeful insight was this: if empaths learn to protect rather than abandon their authenticity, they become not victims of the world's numbness, but guides out of it. The question is not whether others will resent your sensitivity. The question is whether you will let their resentment convince you to abandon it. Jung's answer was clear: never betray your feeling function, for it is both your gift and the world's cure. And so the paradox deepens, because the empath who dares to keep their light alive will walk through a world that often mistakes radiance for arrogance, depth for danger, tenderness for weakness. Jung understood this bitter irony, that humanity desperately needs the very qualities it cannot bear to face. To remain open when others have closed, to feel when others have gone numb, to carry innocence where others have surrendered to cynicism. This is both the wound and the gift. He warned that the greatest threat to the empath is not hatred from the outside, but erosion from within. It begins quietly. A sensitive soul absorbs years of being told they are too much. They hear it in the sigh of a lover who cannot match their depth, in the mocking voice of a colleague who hides behind detachment, in the well-meaning warning of a parent who insists the world is too cruel for soft hearts. Over time, these voices begin to settle inside the empath's own mind. They no longer need critics. Self-doubt has learned to sing their song. What was once a light becomes a candle flickering in the wind, each gust whispering, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too much." This is where the true battle begins, because the empath who turns against themselves has already lost more than any critic could ever steal. Jung called it the tragedy of self-betrayal, when the soul that once refused to dim begins to snuff out its own flame, mistaking survival for wisdom. It is the saddest transformation he ever documented, the healer who poisons themselves with the very venom they once endured from others. And yet, within this darkness, Jung found the seed of transformation. He taught that the empath must reinterpret the hostility they face. When someone says, "You're too sensitive," the translation is, "I have lost my own sensitivity, and your presence reminds me of my wound." When they say, "You're too trusting," the hidden confession is, "I was betrayed so deeply that I cannot forgive myself for ever trusting." When they say, "The world will eat you alive," the truth is, "I let the world devour me, and I cannot forgive myself for it." Each criticism, when seen through Jung's lens, is not a judgment of the empath, but a revelation of the critic's hidden grief. From this realization grows a new kind of strength, not the hardened armor of emotional numbness, but the soft, unyielding resilience of one who knows their own worth. Jung urged empaths to stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and to start asking, "What pain in them am I reflecting?" This shift reclaims the innocence once punished, transforming it into a kind of luminous wisdom, compassion without naivety, openness without blindness. Still, Jung knew that compassion without protection is martyrdom. That is why he spoke of boundaries, but not boundaries made of steel. He envisioned boundaries like membranes, selectively permeable, alive, discerning. The empath does not need to wall themselves off from the world. They must learn to let love in and let projection slide off like rain from skin. This was his vision of true individuation, not isolation, not surrender, but conscious choice about who may enter the sanctuary of the heart. It is in this stage that the empath discovers the rarest form of power, not the power to dominate, but the power to remain authentic when others retreat into masks, to remain soft when others harden into stone, to remain radiant in the face of shadows. And in doing so, they become what Jung called emotional pioneers, those who walk ahead into territory others are too afraid to face, carrying a flame that may one day guide the collective out of its darkness. But the path is perilous, for there are traps even in awakening. Jung wrote of the revenge trap, the empath who, finally seeing through projection, begins to strike back with the same bitterness once directed at them. "If you hated my light, then I will hate your darkness." But this, he warned, is merely another form of shadow possession. The empath who attacks has ceased to be healer and has become mirror of their abuser. Another trap is superiority, the temptation to feel holier, wiser, better than those who live in numbness. Jung called this enlightened arrogance, a dangerous poison that replaces humility with contempt. True sensitivity is not a crown to be worn above others. It is a bridge built for them. Another danger is isolation. Some, weary of being misunderstood, withdraw entirely, declaring the world unworthy of their light. But Jung cautioned, light hidden ceases to be light. Withdrawal may feel safe, but it deprives both the empath and the world of the aliveness they were meant to share. Survival becomes suffocation. The final and most tragic pitfall is dimming. Even after all the insight, even after understanding projection, some empaths still shrink, still decide it is easier to be small than to shine. They may live longer that way, but they do not live fuller. Jung's plea was simple. Better to burn bright for fewer eyes than to smolder in darkness for a lifetime. History, he observed, proves the point. For every Van Gogh who could not protect his gift, there is a Francis of Assisi who transformed criticism into fuel for compassion. For every empath who collapsed under the weight of resentment, there is one who turned it into wisdom, becoming not less, but more. The difference lay not in their sensitivity, but in their ability to interpret hostility as shadow rather than truth, and in their courage to surround themselves with those who celebrate rather than punish authenticity.